a little bit of knowledge in an area like investing can give you the tools to understand what makes a good business. The biohacker community, whose goal is optimization, not just cures, but are taking similar risks as people with rare disease did historically. And I think this is one of the most like underrated, but like most obvious future places where we're going.
Body. What is it?
Fleming of St Mary's Hospital, London, who discovered that it produces the drug known as penicillin.
The question was, which drug would go with which cell?
It's a collaboration that's unexpected because it's between humans and the tiniest organisms.
The howl of a dire wolf.
Dorset lamb may represent a major landmark.
I did not start off planning to design proteins.
Scientific breakthrough will probably be something that we hard to imagine.
Just at birth could map out an individual's entire future risk of disease.
I can talk about this. Like, really, to make an investment, the stars have to align. Like, you need people to be raising at a reasonable valuation. They need to reference well. They need to have like near-term goals that might be commercializable. Like, if you're not making drugs. So yeah, all of those things come into play with making an investment. And also you have to get there first too, if you're a fund that leads rounds. So I can definitely talk about like the like even sometimes the technicalities of like, this is overpriced, or we can't get equity targets that we need. So that makes it uninvestable.
Okay. Yeah. So there's like these like rules around that you guys like stick to. Okay.
Yeah. We try to, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I think maybe we can start with a bit about your background, right? I mean, I think you've had a pretty comprehensive biology training, but also just like these experiences in VC, in consulting, in science, in obviously now sort of as a partner at an investment fund. Did you always foresee that you would go through all of these career transitions as a way of like learning and skill development, or did this just happen naturally?
Yeah, I was searching for what I wanted to do, and I always knew that I loved science. Initially, I really loved being in the lab. I loved doing experiments. I loved the culture of uncovering knowledge. But after, maybe you relate to this as well, Ben, but after you've been in a lab for 10 years, moving clear liquids into tiny tubes and mixing them around.
Yeah, I'm already over it.
Yeah, it's difficult. And during my PhD, I did shift to more computational bioinformatics, which I really enjoyed and found productive and helpful. But yeah, in terms of what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, I did try interning in pharma, did consulting projects for startups, but you know, as I was interning in VC, it just stuck a lot more. The nature of the relationships that you can build with really great people, how you can help people as they figure out what to do with their business, because you start to see patterns of how great companies are built, or where companies fall down. And it's been a fun ride. I think 5 years ago now is when I started my first internship in venture, and no regrets.
And what do you like about it? Like you've mentioned sort of this relationship building. The sort of bearish argument would be that it might be fun to sort of step away from the wet lab and step away from moving liquids around, but that it's like fundamentally less productive, that maybe it it feels better, but it would be sort of less impactful. Like what is the case for becoming a venture capitalist, especially in biology?
Yeah, I think the case is a few different things coming together. It's like, are you curious? Do you feel frustrated by only studying one thing very deeply? I definitely did, and probably had one of the broadest PhDs possible because of that. And one of the broadest research trajectories that I've seen. I did infectious disease research, DNA repair research, neuroscience research at the NIH. My PhD was in synthetic biology and algae. And yeah, after going through the gamut, I think understanding similar technologies can be applied to many different systems, and you can vet those, and you can study companies that have tried translating those. So yeah, I think curiosity, frustration of feeling intellectually constrained and constrained by subject area, and a love of finance and financialization of these. And yeah, I love all of those things.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I didn't actually appreciate that side. Where did this love for finance come from? Like, what is it about the financial side that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I did this really special master's degree called Bioscience Enterprise before my PhD, and it's an MBA for scientists. And during this degree, you do a crash course in everything biotech related: biotech stock research, biotech venture capital, biotech consulting, biotech entrepreneurship. And yeah, I just felt a gravitational pull towards the equity research and venture capital sides. I actually, I used that to almost start a venture, a public equities fund at my college at Cambridge. Due to some political reshufflings, it didn't end up happening. But I feel like a little bit of knowledge in an area like investing can give you the tools to understand what makes a good business. And with science and biotech generally, business is where you can actually see if your ideas matter commercially, and is really where rubber hits the road on utility. And I'm fascinated by that utilization aspect of biotech and what is valued.
Mm-hmm. What is valued by society, right? It's like, if your idea or this technology can't generate revenue in the marketplace, and it hasn't reached this stage of technological maturity to be useful to society at large, right? How do you find those companies? Like, if someone was pitching you a company, what would be the mental sort of framework that you would have to evaluate how likely you would be to invest in them, and sort of how likely they would be to become a successful business?
Yeah, there's really discrete frameworks for each type of company. So with diagnostics, the current framework that we have is that you need to be using diagnostics in order to create a biobank of samples in a disease area of commercial value. So Tempus and Caris Life Science are versions of this, and we're really ahead of the game in collecting tumor samples, sequencing them, and on the back end doing data services and licensing deals. And in the data and services licensing deal side, that's where you can start to separate operating cost from revenue. But you have a network effect from the company because they've made the test tests so that they, in and of themselves, are profitable. So in diagnostics, that's a core evaluation. In therapeutics companies, people have been building therapeutics companies for decades, and there's a pretty clear framework of mechanistic disease understanding is predictive of success. Cell-based screens and animal-based screens, depending on the disease, there's some that are more predictively valid than others, and so we like to dig into that. And in terms of modalities, we really were very much up for taking modality risk if it can access new target space and or new therapeutic potential. So that's diagnostics, therapeutics, and then there's this like third bucket of software and services for the life sciences that we've invested in as well. And with those, the business models there are much more nebulous, because in terms of like software for life sciences, you have two monopolistic companies. You have Dotmatics, which has taken a private equity play of software roll-ups, cutting those initial teams, and doing a software integration, and upselling of those different customer bases into other Dotmatics product suites. And then you have Benchling, which has started to use a similar playbook. But for Viva as well, but less relevant on the R&D side. For those companies, I think what they did really well is understood an emerging market and a lack of suitable tools for scientists. So I think, thinking adjacently, I think there are other areas that could be expanding, like how we automate science, for example, how we talk to lab robots, that today is still fairly small. A lot of labs have Opentrons machines, but they're not very well utilized. So if you can increase that capacity, you can also collect really fascinating data about the translation of manual experiments to autonomous ones. And so that is an area that's been of interest to us. And then there is the pharma software and services marketplace that is very, very well developed. Certara is a public company that initially started off with services contracts, but is gradually moving those to software contracts and software builds. They make $400 million a year in revenue. And so ways that you can expand and or build better products in terms of PKPD. They do anything from PKPD to ADMET properties to regulatory filings and ensuring you have the all of the requisite data for FDA submissions. But yeah, understanding that market has been a big part of the past couple years, and definitely expansive as well.
Absolutely. The three kind of areas that I really want to go in depth with you on are around sort of robotics, the therapeutics, and the diagnostics. You've obviously mentioned sort of what criteria you use to evaluate some of these. I think let's get started with the sort of lab automation tech that we've been seeing. This is a field that had a lot of excitement, I think, even like a few decades ago. I forget the name of this company, but there was a couple of lab automation companies that sort of had this idea, like, what if, all of these wet lab experiments were fully automated and it was all in the cloud, and you as a scientist just like submit your experiments, and then it gets done somewhere, and then you receive your data, and it's like high quality control, very consistent. It sort of solves this issue of consistency and reproducibility in science. And then it didn't work, right? It was sort of, these experiments were too complex to automate. Each experiment that someone submitted was essentially bespoke. And it ended up being that sort of a lot of these CROs kind of developed, very particular assays that they were able to scale in a high throughput way, but sort of the day-to-day grunt work of academia hasn't been automated away. And yet we have these like great individual automated systems. Like we have great mammalian cell culture, like just these huge racks, right? Almost like racks in a data center that do mammalian cell culture. We have great opentrons, like liquid handling robots, but it seems to me that like while pharma has kind of implemented them in high throughput ways, they haven't been all like linked together to create like one fully automated closed loop. And I'm curious, like what are your thoughts on this? And like, is this the future? What's sort of left before we get there? Right?
Yeah. That's a great question. And it's something every company in this space has to answer as they decide where in the stack to build, whether it's new hardware, software for automation, and or using their closed loop system in order to sell products to people. So an example of someone doing automation and selling, in their case, sequencing services, is Plasmidsaurus. And they have been successful for many reasons. I think people always underestimate how important brands are for biotech and how much fun is for scientists too. But most importantly, they shortened the turnaround times for people to receive sequencing data, and they upgraded Sanger sequencing data to nanopore sequencing data. And this allows for whole plasmid sequencing instead of 800 base pair windows. And that simplicity in analysis is saves people a lot of time, and it saves you from having to run gels and do restriction digest before you actually send off samples. So I think they're actually, a really standout company that shows like what happens when you combine functional improvements to scientists' workflows with a great brand. And within 3 years, I looked this up a couple weeks ago, the whole plasmid sequencing market in US and Europe is $150 million. And Mark Budd said in an interview recently that he's at $50 million. So 30%, 33% market penetration is like really incredible.
At least for biotech. Right?
Yeah, for biotech, yeah. But yeah, I think people can use that model for different layers on, different products and different services for biotech. You can do that for DNA synthesis and making plasmids for people. You can do it for chemical synthesis, which is something we're really excited about because chemical syntheses are normally a key choke point for therapeutics development timelines. In the future, you could maybe do it for cell engineering as well, if you can turn engineered cells around in 24 hours. And that just takes, so I think there's still a lot to do in terms of like studying scientists' workflows and understanding where they spend a lot of time / what their holdups are in the development cycle. And then automating your one lab and servicing that part of the workflow for scientists. In terms of new hardware, it's maybe bad to say this, but to me, all lab robots look the same. They're like these boxes with a similar like claw type feature that goes in and out and mixes liquids. Only a couple of the big ones have vision systems as well, and vision is really core to how science is conducted. because you need to see how viscous the liquid is, if there's any bubbles in it. So net new hardware, I think, is really underrated, and a lot of people don't go there because it's hard to build new hardware. But I think that could actually change the usability aspect and what experiments could be possible in a similar square foot space. So it's like if you could do like the twist, DNA synthesis on a chip, but if you could do that for cell engineering instead, or if you could do like DNA synthesis and cell engineering on, a similar, like on the same chip, that would be really impactful. And we have some versions of this with bioanalyzers, but bioanalyzers are just too expensive.
What are bioanalyzers?
Bioanalyzers are chips that you use when you're trying to understand purity of RNA, degradation of RNA.
Okay.
And yeah, it's like it's a miniature electrophoresis gel that you run, and then you're able to see a picture of that gel and understand RNA degradation. But yeah, they're prohibitively expensive, and like because of that, you only use them for sequencing samples that, sequencing, if you're doing several batches of it, that'll cost quite a lot. So it makes sense to do a bioanalyzer run. But yeah, I'm really excited and passionate about biologists needing new hardware in which we're doing experiments. And then there's the software side, which I agree today, there haven't been scaled company successes there yet. But if hardware net gets better and we're able to somehow merge our tacit knowledge of science, one of our portfolio companies, Briefly Bio, is doing this. Transfer Bio is also in this space as well. If we're able to merge that with miniaturized experiments where you can actually have closed loop systems in a small like square footage, then I think that starts to shift shift the utility of these systems and our ability to fully automate workflows.
Okay, I see. I think the reason that a lot of founders don't take the hardware direction is, one, there doesn't seem to be a lot of overlap between sort of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering majors and biology majors, right? They typically stay in their separate lanes. Usually they might go into like aerospace engineering, for example. Whereas you do see this kind of established pipeline of people who study computer science and then they do biology, or they do biology and then they learn computer science and they kind of become computational biologists and become very proficient in the wet lab and the dry lab. But it's just like the skill set of people that are like, oh, I know how I could physically automate this and like construct this, and I also know what the problems are in the space that need to be solved, is very, very rare. And then, as you mentioned, it's also super hard to do. And then I think the other reason is that, especially like as biologists, we want to help cure people of diseases and extend the health span, et cetera, et cetera. And to sort of be thinking about ways that we can accelerate science, it is like probably the logical thing to do. Like more people should be focused on accelerating the collective work of all global scientists rather than like bringing a particular drug to market. But it's really hard to sort of take that ego hit and, work on hardware, right? And sort of become this sort of services provider for other companies that end up sort of generating, I think, most of the actual revenue, like pharmaceutical companies kind of get the lion's share of the revenue in the end. Yeah, I mean, like, do you have any thoughts on that and sort of why you think more founders should be considering sort of hardware and automation and robotics rather than just pure sort of therapeutics plays?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think the main reason is that it's like a rising tide type technology. Like, it enables every pharma company. It would enable every pharma company in biotech to work faster, work smarter, reduce costs through reagents. But yeah, I guess, yeah, it has a PR problem.
Yeah, I guess so. You've published a few sort of articles on the sort of Compound VC website. They're quite widely read. I think that's probably how you became well known in the first place, was sort of through your writing. I think, or at least that's how I first came across you. Curious about your sort of vision of the future, right? So I think if you have a couple essays on sort of where biology is going, these like timelines, almost like this AI 2027 timelines, but around sort of like longevity and biohacking, etc. Can you kind of lay out your vision on where you think the world is heading, and sort of why you think these things are true?
Yeah. I think the biggest shift is the distrust of healthcare systems and distrust of medical systems and people taking their health into their own hands. This has played out for decades before in the rare disease community, where parents and families of children with rare disease would seek out their own child's treatment, go to different countries where this trial was happening, interface with labs to understand present or future treatment options. I think all of biotech is headed to this place, for better or worse. It's because we all have access to a lot of scientific legibility through LLMs. And so we can put all of our results into LLMs and see if we're healthy, see like what we can improve. And yeah, so adjacent to this is the biohacker community, which whose goal is optimization, not just cures, but are taking similar risks as what people with rare disease did historically. And I think this is one of the most like underrated, but like most obvious future places where we're going. For the past decade, at least, that I've been in biotech, people have been talking about precision medicine and like what this means, but it's always been like from a DNA base of like a DNA foundation of like, if you know drivers of your genetic drivers of your disease, then we can make drugs specifically for that. But I think the paradigm now, and the paradigm we're working towards, is that people will be able to prompt engineer their own drugs, maybe not in 5 years, but like on a 10 to 15 year time scale. And I think it'll be the individual that is really making precision medicine a reality.
That is a pretty wild viewpoint. I like it. I think the reaction of some people listening would be like that just seems unrealistic, that there's always going to be this sort of FDA intermediary that's going to prevent this sort of future from coming to fruition. There's going to be this sort of evangelical Christian base in the US that sort of prevents much sort of human genetic enhancement for optimization purposes in the same way that the biohacking community is experimenting with small molecules and peptides. What do you think changes culturally, right? Like how does this go to mainstream? Is it just that it becomes more accessible, or like, what's the progression, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that like, I think national borders don't matter as much as they used to. And if someone has a disease and they're, for whatever reason, out of treatment options, they can literally just go to Honduras or Germany or China and get the drug instead. And so I think so the limiter in that case would be like knowledge of this other treatment option, and then like cost of travel. But yeah, neither of those seem like large barriers. But I think the big question, which you're like very right about, is will the U.S. benefit and capture this knowledge and continue to be the biotech leader in the world in an age where people can go anywhere to get the drugs that they want? And I think this is what the U.S. is grappling with right now.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm trying to understand is how can we have this sort of transhumanist future while also profiting from it, right? Like I want there to be 20 amazing trillion-dollar biotech companies in the US that are all providing some level of enhancement. One of them makes you grow bigger muscles, another one makes you live longer and improves your genomic integrity. But if these things don't get approved and they just sort of become these specialized sort of rogue treatments that people have to fly to Honduras to get, it seems to me that it won't actually spread that far. For these things to genuinely become widespread, they need to be like somehow embedded in this like accepted healthcare zeitgeist, and like you should go to your doctor and your doctor should say, hey, looks like you're accumulating mutations, you should probably go on this drug, and like your insurance will pay for it because it's sort of structured that way. Your insurance company benefits from you sort of taking a more preventative, proactive approach to your health. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think that that's this more like Honduras rogue healthcare approach is sort of how we're going to get there as a civilization?
Yeah, I think they're fun thought experiments. So on the rogue Honduras way, if we are all prompt engineering our own cures, what happens is that the money goes to the manufacturing companies and not to the therapeutics development companies, because the therapeutics development is through some type of general intelligence.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that becomes interesting because if if a protein design company is all of a sudden making treatments for millions of people, it's the protein design, and well, it's not even the design, it's the manufacture of those, and that becomes valuable. And same with chemical synthesis, same with gene therapies as well. So I think that could be a fascinating reorientation of the industry. But yeah, if our future healthcare systems stay the way they are, can you have individualized therapies in the current system? I think you can still, and maybe the future is more like you have a Pfizer model, you have an Eli Lilly model, you have like a Chai Discovery model, and you prompt engineer all of those and then try all of those treatments, and whichever one treats you best, then you pay that company's model. And there could be like a really fascinating arms race between these companies in terms of like who produces the best drug, for what modalities do they produce that, how do they collect data on them long term. I think that's something I would love the biohacker community to do better, is like rigorous data collection around their experimentation. But yeah, what do you think of those two like futures or ways of value capture?
I think when you extend out across a very long time horizon, any technology becomes very accessible, right? Like computer technology before having personal computers was these things that you could only really access if you were familiar with computer science, if you were specialized, if you had a lot of money, if you were sort of in a company. And then now they've become these like distributed value generators where you sort of pay for the hardware, you pay for the software, and then you sort of can generate unlimited value yourself, and it's become very democratized. I think it's probably going to be true for biology, right? Like if you truly have closed loop experiments, and eventually you have these general intelligences that fully understand biology and have sort of been trained on vast quantities of data, sort of like taking these like virtual cell models, but like taking them to the extreme and making them actually good and usable, then yeah, maybe like we have these like biological computers just in our homes, and when we want something, we just prompt it, and it sort of creates the vial in one closed loop. But yeah, I still think that's like a very far away future, and I'm curious more about like what is the intermediary that sort of gets us there? Like, is it going to be that the FDA becomes kind of open to these more preventative, more enhancement style therapeutics rather than necessarily having to have some clinical indication or some rare disease that you're trying to treat? Like, I'm all for rare diseases. I was just at like the Rett syndrome conference, and there's definitely a patient need, but I think biology will be is fundamentally underutilized if all that we use these technologies for is to sort of treat some rare illness that a very small proportion of the population has. Like everyone should benefit from these technological enhancements.
I mean, there already are so many intermediary steps that we can use to get human evidence quickly, from compassionate use after an IND is filed, even before clinical trials. Through compassionate use, you can try out diseased patients can try out therapies. There's phase 0 trials where you can microdose diseased patients and understand PK/PD and binding dynamics of new treatments. And with phase 0, you can also do cassette microdosing, where you dose them with your lead series of multiple compounds and see which ones have better PK/PD, and then translate those. There's the Department of Defense Enhanced Engagement, where you can make drugs for soldiers, get shortened timelines, maybe get some government kickbacks from that as well. But I think all of these things are working towards the same goal of like, how do we get human evidence faster? And and I think all of these, if they're exploited to their maximum degree, could be that intermediary step. Another viewpoint is that clinical trials, as we know them, change because they were approved after some not malicious drugs, but some drugs that cause severe side effects came to market, like thalidomide. And so this like bureaucracy has grown over time. But in that period when thalidomide was causing defects, a lot of drugs were, which is very bad and pregnant. For those that don't know, thalidomide is a drug that causes severe defects in children, especially it made their limbs much smaller in many cases. And definitely we should have as many safeguards around that not happening as possible, especially for children. And I feel like there should be tiers of people that should be experimenting, and pregnant women should not be experimenting with therapies. And even to the point where like if you're someone that wants to have children someday, I also think the burden of proof for experimentation should be higher for you as well. But all of this to say, in that same timeline, the golden age of drug discovery, some of the first, I think the first antibiotic for tuberculosis was discovered. The first birth control was discovered. Cortisol for treating autoimmune diseases was discovered. And that was all due to just fast feedback loops of new chemical space. And we can replicate that again.
I think that's probably a good argument, that there's something to say that this bureaucracy has probably grown too large in compensation for it being too small in the past and having these major disasters happen. But I think as probably, I don't know, but probably as like this intelligence, this biological intelligence becomes commoditized, these kinds of grave mistakes are going to be less likely at every stage, right? We already have these these initial assays, right, to determine toxicity. We have good mechanistic understanding to prevent even proposing a lead candidate with any kind of impact on fertility or health. Besides the sort of usual side effects. So I think that's probably a good argument. And the question is just sort of how are we going to get there? Like, I think China, for example, is in their version of the FDA has hired like 10 times more people than the US, and they're like basically from like sort of submitting your the equivalent of an IND to actually receiving like an approval or not is like weeks to like a couple months rather than like 9 months. And the question is like, are we going to get there as a country, or are we going to sort of get left behind and sort of have more and more of the research and development and sort of these new drugs being developed overseas and particularly in China, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Compound is a US based fund. So I'm also curious what your kind of long-term view is on where the research and development is going to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, in the next 10 years, I see US still being like a really key player. That being said, some of our therapeutics companies are or will be doing trials in Australia, and it's really clear and obvious path now. And I'd be curious as an Australian your take on this. But yeah, I think like in the intermediate time where there is a geographic arbitrage to human evidence, places like Australia, New Zealand, China will become a lot more developed. But once we get to the end state of where all of this is headed, which is successful prompt engineering of drugs, self-dosing and monitoring, that is distributed again. And that happens everywhere. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that, I mean, China has done a few very successful things, which is like have a very competent and large FDA where you sort of there's no limit on labor. So when they want to get more people to review these filings, they just get more people, and therefore it's sort of more efficient. And they've sort of integrated and streamlined the process a little bit more than what we have here. Whereas Australia just throws money in it. Like my understanding is you just get a 40% back from the Australian government. I mean, it's called the tax incentive, but it doesn't come out of the tax that you pay in the country. It's just a direct cash payment. which is why a lot of companies sort of do their clinical trials there,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. I'm pro Australia, and
Yeah.
I think they've got a great biotech ecosystem that's sort of still growing, and they definitely punch above their weight in scientific output, but not so much in commercialization. Like I think the usual approach there is you have this this compound. The next question is, which US biotech or biopharma company do you start talking to? And like, if they don't want it, you just shelve it. You don't like spin it out into a startup very often, right? And I think it's uniquely this venture capital ecosystem in the US where there's still a lot of money that, well, maybe not right now, but sort of just generally, there's usually a lot of money that can be thrown behind biotech startups led by ambitious young founders and also by ambitious older founders that you just don't have in Australia and in other parts of the world. Like China is trying to create that now by, using or by allocating a lot of like government and sort of local provincial funding towards biotechnology, but sort of it doesn't have quite the established investment ecosystem as the US does. And hopefully that sort of remains true, at least for people that are here and people who want to build companies here. But Shelby, one thing that I wanted to get into more detail on was around these portfolio companies and sort of what excites you about them, if you have favorites, and talk us through maybe starting with the therapeutics category, what companies you've invested in and sort of a couple standouts that excite you, and maybe we can go deeper into a few of them.
Yeah, definitely. In general, compound only uniquely invest in N of one companies, and either it's in an area that's underappreciated, or it's in a very hypey area, but they're taking a different approach to getting to the same result. In the therapeutic space, the three recent investments that we've done are Furon, which does biobank aggregation to help in target discovery and clinical trial matching. A lot of the big pharma groups have genetic evidence teams, but after you get out of the top 5 or 10 big pharma, a lot of companies are not using the massive amounts of biobank data that you have around longitudinal genotype, phenotype data. And that's just like table stakes that they're missing. So Furon is helping them change that. Another one is Polyphron, which is a cell therapy company that initially is starting with single cell therapies for spinal cord injury and optic nerve injury, but eventually want to replace larger parts of the central nervous system. The other recent company that we invested in is Endura Therapeutics, and they do covalent small molecules that drug RNA secondary structures. And that's interesting because when you're drugging RNA secondary structures with covalency, you can have readouts of the transcriptome where you see on and off target effects. And so that got us really excited about the mechanistic understanding that you have of why a drug works. Because something with small molecule protein discovery is that polypharmacology normally has a fairly large part to play, but we're not able to see exactly how that's manifesting in the proteome. And so if you go a layer higher, it gives you a very clear readout in terms of why you're seeing the results that you are. And yeah, with each of these, it was confluence of these founders being obsessed with this area for a long time, working together for a long time. In the case of Furon, in the case of Polyphron, having an excellent academic, Jim Wyman, who had made nerve damaged rats like gain full functionality again, and bringing that expertise into the company with Matt Osman, who is a multi-time tech founder. And then with Endura Therapeutics, it was a next instantiation of RNA therapeutics and why the previous companies have not worked, because most RNA therapeutics companies don't covalently bind RNA secondary structures. It's transient binding, which is hard for readouts, probably less efficacious as well. And the team from there had looked at RNA therapeutics before, covalent therapeutics, and then looked at them from pharma as well. So that was a really special constellation of people that had thought about this problem more than anyone else in the world. And yeah, so a lot of our investments, we'd done pre-work on these areas in different ways, but one of the main diligence points after it's thematically and scientific interesting is how are these people, these founders, the best people not only today to start this company, but in terms of historic founders in this area and future founders, how can they continue to win and progress their company in an area of increasing competition? And with all of those, the companies felt like their life's work.
Fascinating. That seems to me, I mean, I've heard a few different investment theses, and that seems to be probably the best one that I've heard in terms of, from an intuitive perspective, if it's going to be leading, if it's going to bear good fruit, right? So you've talked about obsession of the founders around a particular problem, and in a particular like area. You've talked about obviously like a lot of experience, right? So seeing the same problem from different perspectives and having like worked on it for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
This is their sort of, this is their life's work. And then obviously like thematically and sort of thematically interesting to you and to a compound. There was a third one that I think I forgot. Did I?
No, I think those were it. I mean, yeah. With therapeutics in general, we're constantly adding to our frameworks of what makes a good therapeutics investment, because we have so much data to go on. So one version of that was looking at drug spend over time. Well, drug spend in the development process, and seeing that clinical trials are the place where like spend is high, failure is also really high. So different methods to reduce that will be very valuable. And that framework interested us in Fearon, because if you can screen millions of people in the population, understand, filter for the disease of interest that you're trying to filter for, understand their disease trajectories, then you have a better starting point in order to make the drug discovery program. You're starting with humans because you end with humans as well. Mm-hmm. That was exciting. For Polyphron, we'd looked quite a bit in the cell therapy space, just the first principles of dysfunctioning and or hurt or damaged system, and being able to restore functionality of that. And we're seeing that with a lot of different neurotherapeutics companies, Blue Rock Therapeutics, inserting dopaminergic neurons, and, Parkinson's patients improving because of that. Neurona Therapeutics, which is also a neuronal cell therapy company, having good readouts in epilepsy patients, reducing epilepsy by 97% or something crazy. So it's a very first principles way of curing disease that really excites us. And within Endura Therapeutics, it was the fact that you could get functional understanding so much quicker through understanding the whole transcriptome. And you can use that to merge target-based drug discovery and phenotypic drug discovery into one company. And I think that's, as a field, what we're moving closer towards, because phenotypic drug discovery is great for understanding new mechanisms. Target-based drug discovery is great for really executing known targets, known causes of disease. But if we can have both into one company, that's really the holy grail of drug discovery. And Endura can, help take us there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And the other thing you mentioned that I forgot to mention in the last summary was this correlation between a good mechanistic understanding of sort of why your particular target or modality is going to cure the disease, and sort of how this correlates with success of the final drug.
Yeah.
Would you, as an investor, invest in a company where they don't have a mechanistic explanation, but they sort of have this high throughput, we have a platform and we're going to throw everything at this disease, and sort of that is what is unique about us? It's the sheer number of molecules that we can throw at a problem, or is that just not interesting to compound?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work on this internally. One of my colleagues, Mackenzie Moorhead, has been spearheading a project where he's looking at the chance of success of all clinical platform therapeutics companies over the last 40 years. And he's actually seen very clear data that the companies that focus on mechanistic diseases where we understand the mechanism of disease pathology have 3 to 4 times higher chance of success than those that are just like throwing a platform at a cell. And the companies that came back were, people know that they're great companies. It's Vertex Therapeutics, Regeneron, Alnylam, and Ionis are obviously there because they're ASOs and RNAi. In order to even make drugs for those targets in the first place, you need to know that those specific SNPs are causal of the disease, so it makes sense that they have such a high chance of success. But yeah, all of this work has really led us to desire to have mechanistic understanding of targets that therapeutics companies are prosecuting.
What would need to change from a mechanistic interpretability, understanding perspective for a company that is trying to improve DNA repair for lifespan purposes, for example, to be viable from an investment perspective, from a probability of success in the eyes of compound, and then you can also propose your own idea for what you think should be brought to the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. From a DNA integrity perspective, I think there's rare diseases like Lynch syndrome, which are increase the mutational rate of colon cells. So I think could be some proof of concept in patient-derived cells of those, then human studies of people with Lynch syndrome, and whether your editing and or molecule biologic is able to change outcomes of those patients. And then, there's other diseases where DNA damage accumulation is core to their disease pathology. So I think, a sequence of cellular human rare disease. And I think that's why rare disease is also so interesting, because the disease pathologies of some rare diseases are broadly applicable to aging in the case of DNA mutations, or they're applicable in terms of, rare cardiac disease could have actual applications to other cardiac diseases and hypertension. So, I think that's like the magic bullet if you do work with rare diseases, but that isn't your company's ultimate end goal, is to prove out a mechanism in an area where you want to expand to something, to a much larger indication area.
That makes sense, right? If you can, there is already disease for which there is a very strong mechanistic interpretation, understanding that basic biologists have sort of honed over decades. And if you can reverse that phenotype, and if the mechanism of DNA damage sort of also applies in cancer prevention and sort of in lifespan extension, then if you can reverse the disease, then hopefully you also have an impact on these other things, but sort of as a byproduct. And you also have this like intermediary revenue stream, this pathway to the market that can get investors sort of immediately excited and get returns on investment quickly, sort of at the rate that you would need for current venture capital, right, in biotech. So yeah, that's actually kind of learned something new there, but also curious about what ideas you have and that maybe you've seen but sort of haven't really been brought fully to fruition, but you think you should.
Yeah, we have this idea that gene engineering applied to flowers, flower engineering to make flowers more beautiful, can be a venture scale company, because flowers have large margins in the first place, 30% plus margins. They're a massive market, 30 billion market size. People in the US spend 8 billion on flowers for weddings. And no people are applying gene editing into the beautiful flower species that we all know and love.
I can see you've met Nick.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Nick is incredible. And importantly, it's low regulation. Non-edible flowers, you only need to go through one regulatory body, the USDA, and not the FDA and not the EPA. So that confluence of factors of low regulation, high revenue, high margins is what building biotech businesses, venture scale businesses is all about.
Okay. I've seen Nick around. We're going to get him on next week, actually.
Awesome.
I'll commit to that. I think it would be great to have a conversation about flowers and the things he's building, just the designs that he's making and the pigments that he's creating are like really beautiful. So definitely excited for that. Okay, yeah, that's I think probably a relatively unconventional idea that I think most people would not at a surface level think could be a venture scale business, but kind of reading a little bit deeper into the tea leaves, there is a case to be made for it. We are kind of running out of time here, Shelby, but I wanted to get one last question in around some books that you would recommend to the audience, and sort of maybe they're inspiring or maybe that they inspired you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of a wild book name, but Venomous Lumpsucker is an amazing futuristic book about how capitalism, late stage capitalism, crypto, and biotech play out.
That's phenomenal.
And yeah. And it has just these amazing dystopic / incredible ideas. They have pills that you take before you eat food that was produced with intensive agriculture, which is like much worse in the future than it is in the present. They have ideas about multimodal preservation of humans, so that you can resuscitate them, and multimodal preservation of extinct species as well, because, it's just kind of a given that so many species would go extinct. So, that's one that I always come back to. I recently read Ezra Klein's Abundance, which was fascinating, about lower regulations leading to better systems and a better world. And I'd love a abundance version of what does significantly lower regulations look like in healthcare and in biotech. I recently read Octavia Butler's Dawn book about humans fully interacting and integrating with alien species, cancer being used, aliens' understanding of cancer being used to help aliens regrow limbs. It's really a fascinating bio multi-planet future that's incredible to read as well.
There's so many of them, and yet not enough of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But yeah, great recommendation, Shelby. Thanks for coming on. This was phenomenal.
Thanks for having me.